only way to actually change something is if you understand its driving forces. Because everything in the world makes sense. Like there's a reason for everything. It's not like there's just these inherently harmful people, be they of any identity, right? It's like, and if we think that, we're never going to actually change anything because we're just like in this, like you can't do anything with that.
My name's Ashanti, and welcome to the Taking Off the Mask podcast, where men get real. Men of all ages and backgrounds come to this space to own and discuss how they present themselves to the world. In our work, the front of the mask represents the qualities and things that we gladly share with the world. And the back of the mask represents the qualities and characteristics that we don't normally talk about. Ask yourself right now, what will go on your mask? What are some things that you're talking about a lot? And what are some things that you're avoiding? You know, sharing his mask today is David Dean. David is a political educator, speaker, writer. He's dedicated to supporting white people to engage in multiracial social movements with emotional strength, political clarity, and fierce purpose. You know, in these conversations, it's been really beautiful. You know, yesterday was Juneteenth. And whether you celebrated or didn't, it is a day that's really important for us to be aware of. And I'm really excited to meet people in the world who are helping others understand that the world is a complex place. However you fit into the social structure of the world, or however you have defined your space, it's complex. Maybe you feel totally seen by society around you, and that's beautiful if you do. But maybe you don't. Maybe there's some things that are not working for you. And what we invite in these conversations is for people to come together to explore how we see the world through our own lenses. And through these conversations, we hope that more people will realize that they're not alone. Thank you for being a part of the Taking Off the Mask podcast. If you haven't made a mask, you can do that anonymously at millionmask.org. And this summer, we got some exciting things happening with our youth host, Wenceslao, and we are preparing for an exciting move in the Million Mask movement as we move toward the fall of this next school year. So stay tuned. If you're a parent, teacher, educator, if you know a parent, teacher, educator, if you want to get involved, there are going to be opportunities for you to get involved to help move this movement around the world. We've already reached more than 30 countries. We've already reached more than 70,000 people. And this next chapter is going to hit us to our big milestone goal for 500,000 masks by next year. So stay tuned for the excitement around that. And we appreciate you for listening. Enjoy today's episode with David Dean. And remember, there's more to you than anybody can see by just looking at you. Take care, everybody. Bye now. David Dean, welcome to the Taking Off the Mask podcast. It is so glad to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me, Ashanti. Yeah, really, really appreciate it and glad to be talking to you.
I would like you to tell folks what you want them to know about you before we jump into these masks. So please introduce yourself. Tell folks what you want them to know as we get ready to get started.
I work as a educator and a writer and a trainer, really working around the topic of offering anti-racism education to white people. And I did that with an organization called White Awake for a long time, leading these online courses year round and do that independently now more so. And, you know, really try to offer workshops and trainings and writing that goes deeper than a lot of maybe, you know, more mainstream forms of anti-racism education that might be out there, you know, and that still talks about, you know, like the necessary behavioral corrections that folks should be tracking and trying to make and new concepts to learn, but really also tries to go deeper in helping people process, you know, emotional difficulty that gets in the way of actually engaging in this work and in cross-racial relationships with an open heart. And that also really shows white folks their stake in racial justice, and both on an emotional or spiritual level, in terms of what does it mean to rehumanize ourselves and engage in the creation of a different world, and also really showing people how racism has been used as this tool for centuries to divide and conquer and to separate ordinary people of different colors and keep them from working together to really challenge the corporate domination of working people and the planet itself. And also, really getting into what did whiteness take from white people, right? What are the ways in which this fake harmful identity that people were given, that's not natural, that people were given, stripped us of really life-giving traditional cultures and more radical political traditions that were taken from our ancestors so that they could be enlisted in this role as like foot soldiers of capitalist empire, right? Disconnected themselves and then carrying out more of that disconnection around the world. And I think a lot of this stuff is really a type of education that's important to me because it was what I needed in a big way to be able to engage in this stuff with my full self.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that. There's some words you said there that really stood out to me. I'm really interested in maybe it will come up and as we talk about masks, I think you talk about what did whiteness take from white people, one part, and then the idea of like, how did it convince so many people to be foot soldiers for this idea, right? Of what is right, what is wrong, what is making more at the expense of human capital, human beings. And I think sometimes when I watch the news and I watch these people, and sometimes even the people who have convinced thousands of people to vote for them, when you watch the words that come out of their mouths, sometimes I'm just in shock. I'm just like, where are we? Right? Where am
Mm-hmm.
I? What is
Mm-hmm.
going on here? And the willingness to proudly spew hateful rhetoric. I mean, we can imagine is has happened for centuries that people who can take a mic and who can empower people to be mad about something can rile people up to a sense of hate. But what I've seen just lately has been definitely new for my lifetime, and to watch it and watch people around sit and just say nothing. Watch people
Yeah.
around sit and almost agree, nodding, and it's almost bewildering. And I think that, as I think about what I have seen is this idea of adult bullying, right? How many adults are afraid for their job, for their career, for this thing that they say they're not gonna be in it forever, but they seem to be holding on to it like they're holding on for dear life, right? And
Yeah.
how often that adult bullying. Now, I was bullied as a middle schooler, right? So,
So was I.
oh, the power of it, right? The power to stay silent because of what can happen to you. You feel like it can be worse, right? I don't agree with it, but I better just stick it out because it's going to get worse. And that's what I see happening so often is that all of these adults, college educated. I mean, I was dealing with a middle schooler who didn't know shit, right? Like his belief that his ability to have power over me was the best thing he could do. But I'm talking about people with college advanced degrees
Oh
are
yeah.
walking around tiptoeing, not speaking up for others or even for themselves. Right?
Yeah.
I think it's more than ironic. I don't even have another word. I don't have the vocabulary to know what word it should be. It's so beyond far ironic. It's so beyond like it's sad. It's almost, it's like it's a part of the funny part and it's like this is actually really sad that people are watching this and whether they believe it or not or whether they can buy into it or not, it's a part of what we see. And so
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
for the work you're doing.
Yeah. And I think the powerful thing for me has been sort of seeing the ways in which it's like strategic, that like the Reverend William Barber, who is in, leadership of the Poor People's Campaign, right now talks about this idea that we have to show people the trick, right? We have to
Mm.
we have to not just like call you out for your crap, right? But we actually need to show you how you are being fed these lies for a political purpose to get you to co-sign, right? Like these billionaires' agenda who just are always delivering disproportionate harm to people of color, but ultimately want to enrich themselves at the expense of everybody.
Mm.
Yeah, so that's been
Wow.
a powerful thing for me to try to like process why this is happening and how we might be able to do something about it. Yeah.
Oh man, we're already in it. It's gonna come up when I talk.
Yeah.
It's gonna come up when I talk about the back of the mask because I think actually I'm really clear now what I really want to share about the back today because like I found myself feeling that same fear of speaking up, fear of fear, and so let's jump in. Let's jump in now. As you the guest, so you get to decide who goes first. Do you want me to go first? Do you want to go first? What feels right for
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, you're welcome to go. Why don't you go first? Yeah, that's fine with me. But I also what you were saying, the fearful of being of expressing difficult ideas to people who might be resistant to them, fear of being outcast. That was a big thing for me too. That I was when I was just doing this mask thing.
Mm, mm. I imagine more are going to come up as we reveal them. All right, so here's what's happening today. This is the fresh, it's a fresh off the press mask, and the words that I use today. I actually have an extra one on here: serious, intense, caring, and funny. And I think that's the facial expression I put on this character is like this very flat, like like really serious, kind of like maybe even a little bit. I don't know, but that idea of like I am very passionate. I have a loud voice. I'm 6'1.5". I'm 300 pounds, right? I'm a big person, and I think I'm a little smart. I'm not right. I mean, it even feels weird saying that. I don't think I say that too often, but I think I'm a little. I think I have a little knowledge. I'm not dumb, right? And I pay attention and I listen and I observe and I'm critical. I'm a critical thinker, right? And I navigate dissonance in a way where I'm like, this is one side. Okay, what is this other side saying? And I try not to like be. Try not to be like dismissive of the other side because I want to understand it a little bit more than just saying, or you're just
Right.
XYZ or you don't know what you're talking about. But I want to be able to be a listener who can hear the other side as well, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes in seriousness and intensity, it's because it's so intense. It oftentimes can miss the part of me that's really caring and funny and who loving, right? Like I think sometimes deep down, the things I'm passionate and intense about are because I care. It's not just to make a point somewhere. It's like it's something I care about, right? And I think trying to like how do I show that? I do my best to show that. I think it's easier to see the serious, intense part. People who really know me know I'm really caring, but if you to first meet me, depends on what mode I'm in. Am I in a presentation mode on
Yeah.
the stage doing storytelling? Am I you
Right.
know, chaperoning some young men around. So I'm like super in like, this father energy of like protection and also trying to have fun in a way, right? Am I in correction mode? Or like, how do you see when you see the outside? But there's so much more happening than people can see from the outside. So that's the front, the serious, intense, caring, funny. I think it gets misunderstood sometimes.
Like some of those characteristics make it more difficult for people to see some of the others.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think the series that I remember one time on a field trip, we were in a grocery store and we were, because we take these young men, it's like, at this time we had a bus, so we came in to get stuff for breakfast. I told the young man, I said, hey, if you go in the store, only go in if you're buying something. We're going to get breakfast food. So if you need something, go get it. But you get your stuff and get out the store. I don't want to have anybody assuming, making any assumptions. Buy what you're going to buy, get out the store. So I get in the store to start getting groceries for the breakfast, and two young men are over there goofing off. And I'm like, come here. I said, what did I tell you all about this store? Right. And this person, a random person comes over and it's like, hey, why are you yelling at those kids?
Right.
And I was like, first of all, who are you? Second of all,
Right.
like, this doesn't concern you. Third of all, I'm not yelling. Fourth of all, I'm protecting them. And so all these things were in my mind. I had to figure out how to respond in a way that wasn't going to come off like a total jerk. But in my mind, I was very sarcastic. And so, like, part of my funny was going to hit the intense, and it was going to be sarcastic. And I was going to be like, who are you? You know what I'm saying? I said, oh, I'm not yelling. This is how I talk. You know, I don't know what I said, but I remember the moment of my energy wanting to, like, I just like turned and looked like, who is this person talking to me about something that has nothing to do with them, you know? And so I think that it can easily be misunderstood, right? Like, I'm caring enough that I don't need anybody coming up to our students saying, what are you doing in this store? So in my mind, I'm in super protection mode. And so that part of me was, and I had to be careful because I knew what was about to come out on this person was some intensity. It wasn't going to be caring. It was going to be intensity because in my mind, I'm like, this doesn't concern you. But yeah, those are the ones that were the words that really stood out to me today in this moment right now. Yeah.
I think too, like one thing that I bet I would assume with your work with students, that like when a kid knows that you care and when that's a clear part of your relationship with them, you can be intense sometimes, you know, in a way that's actually in relationship.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
who talks about that, the idea like you put in the deposits, right? I've deposited
Yeah.
enough
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
this one I'm about to take it out. I'm about to take it out right now. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I've earned some work with some rights right now to be on your case, right? And I think sometimes you may pick the time too soon, right? Before you've deposited enough. And so they don't get it. And so now there's a pushback, right? There's a fight, you know.
Yeah. Totally. Right. Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
front. That's the
Well,
front.
awesome. So I do the front now?
I think that's a good idea. You do the front and then I'll go back.
Okay. Okay. So this is mine. I haven't. So okay. So first of all, I'll say that I mean, I'm not the best drawer except for drawing like Dragon Ball Z characters, which I practiced a lot in like fifth grade. Um, but but I haven't done this exercise. So when I was in college, a really powerful part of my college experience was being a part of and also helping lead like a men's group, really digging into hypermasculinity and doing some of that type of stuff after I finished school too. But I haven't done this exercise since I was since 14 years ago or something. Um, and so I've never drawn myself with a beard. So
Mm.
but nonetheless, this isn't a good picture. But anyway, it has a weird looking little weird beard. But so my words are confident, connected to purpose, and generous and loving. So some of these actually, like on the back too, I kind of did phrases. It wasn't
No
entirely just like
worries.
a word. Yeah,
Perfect.
but
Perfect. Yeah.
so I feel like I've kind of unlearned, I guess, to some, not entirely, obviously, never entirely. But some of the most intense sort of emotional restrictions of like hypermasculinity, you know, like, I mean, I feel like there's more of an emotional life to my existence now than there maybe was at a decade ago um, and so, but I feel like I'm not afraid to be generous and loving, which is one of the things on here.
Mm.
But right, like all the things on here are like really sort of like positive, like put together things, like confident, connected to purpose, generous, and loving. And I feel like one of the maybe like lingering things from that's kind of manifest in a different way from some of that like masculinity, extreme masculinity stuff is just still, when I was reflecting on it, like not letting myself be seen for like having problems, you know, sometimes, not always, but a lot of the time, and not letting myself be seen for being anxious about like introducing myself on this podcast. You know what I mean? Or like just doing anything in life. Yeah. And all these things are like parts of me that are real: confident, connected to purpose, generous, and loving. I feel all of those a lot, but sometimes I feel like those things can overshadow some of the stuff on the back.
Thank you for sharing that. Like earlier when I mentioned about being bullied, you said right away, you said me too, right? So it was almost this moment of like, sometimes it just like we may not ever talk about it until we have an opportunity to recognize that, oh wait, maybe this is a person that I can actually share this with too, right? Because we have something in common.
Right.
And then maybe we will always keep it back until we knew that it was safe, that this person wouldn't necessarily judge me for that, because maybe they also get it. They know what it's like, right? And I wonder
Yeah.
sometimes how often the lack of skill people acquire today with social media. I don't even know where my phone is right now, but when I hold it up, like this idea that, oh, I don't have to hear anything that doesn't match what I already agree with, because all I gotta do is just swipe past it,
Yeah.
right? I just keep
Right.
up. Nope, I don't want to hear that. Oops, nope. The algorithm starts reading my mind. Okay, nope, I don't want to hear that, and then it stops showing me any of that. So I get constantly fed what I already have programmed it to feed me in this digital device. But when I meet somebody in person and they say something I don't really want to hear, it's easy to just swipe past them. But technically, I can't do it physically, but I do it emotionally, right? I'm like, I don't want to hear what you got to say. And we become less able to hear things that don't necessarily match with us. So when somebody says something that matches with us, we're like, oh, yeah, I recognize that. And when they don't, you're like, what's wrong with you? Because we just become unpracticed at hearing things that don't already match with what we already believe.
100%. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, I think we're ready to jump into the back. This one is raw, and I'm still like writing it because I was like, oh, drama. It's a fireball. I've had to wear a good mask these last couple of days. I've had to wear some good masks these last couple of days. So I'm gonna just. Oh God. Okay, here we go. One of our engineer, when he was on the episode, he was like, he challenged me to like write words that I don't usually write, like that I've never written before, and I'm like, oh, that's gonna be hard, right? Because I get into the muscle memory. But this is what I wrote today, and okay, here we go. Fear, organizational drama, and worry.
Uh-huh. Mm.
And I think the one that I would prefer not to talk about is organizational drama, but it's probably the one I need to talk about, right? So, I run a nonprofit. We are, we're a small organization. We're growing fast, and lots of excitement in the growth. I didn't start this work to start a nonprofit, right? If you ask me deep down, I'm like, what are you doing, Ashanti? How are you ever gonna get rich like this? Because my dream growing up was to be rich. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, I've done this. I grew up on this poor stuff, and that ain't no fun. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, if there's an
Right.
option, I choose not poor, right? But I think deep down, as I was like searching and working for Ashanti all my life, in the early, 25, 28, close to 30 years of my life, then I began to realize that my life was actually to be lived and to serve in service of others. I was clear that I went to college to be an engineer, graduated, started making money. Like, yes, I made it. But it didn't bring me much more happiness than I technically have now. If I look at happiness and joy waking up in the morning, I loved engineering. I love the work I do today. The difference is the work I get to do today is in service of so much more of a bigger plan than when I was building buildings, right? I mean, I wasn't, even though if I was
Yeah.
building a hospital, it's going to serve people, but it was just a building. It was the shell of the building, right? It wasn't. But now that I get to build experiences and connections and communities, I feel my purpose is much bigger. Oh, the difference is financial, right? The difference is all financial. But when I think about this organizational drama, is like, as a nonprofit leader, it's like I don't want to be complaining, right? I mean, ultimately, you're trying to build a community of a team of people that are going to kind of help them push it forward. But it's naive to be like, oh, it's always going good. Everything's always going good. Because it's not. It's not. I just got so good at not talking about all the drama that I got to deal with that I oftentimes just focus on when I can talk about the wins. And I find that's not helpful to people out there who are trying to build something. And I'm trying to do better about that in my own sharing in the world, right? Like sharing some of the wins, but also sharing when it's tough, right? Sharing the losses, sharing
Yeah.
the fears and the sadness. And I have a video I made a couple of weeks ago that I was bawling. Like I watched this movie Close, and this movie was about friendships and it's a Belgian film. Lucas Daunt is the director. It got nominated for an Oscar. It's a powerful film. And when the film ended, they were going to do a Q&A with Dr. Niobe Way, and it was based on her research. And I had to leave the room. I left and I went and washed my face. And after I washed my face, I'm like, that's not finishing. That's not dealing with it. So I went outside and I just made a little recording, like, because I was like feeling emotionally I was feeling heavy. And I was like, I'm not sharing this video with nobody. Like I'm like tears are dropping out of my eyes. I was like, and not that I need to show it for any purpose reason, but because I am trying to like normalize the fact that we should be able to feel all different range of feelings. We should be able to experience, feel all different range of feelings, and knowing that what often happens, even with me, a person who believes that I'm not afraid letting people see me cry, that I have fear of people seeing me cry, right?
Yeah.
I can
Oh, yeah.
say with the good words, like, no, I'm not really afraid of people seeing me cry. And why won't I share this video? Because I can justify. Well, no one needs to see that. No one really cares about that, right? I can always justify the counter argument that maybe it could serve somebody, but maybe does the embarrassment worth? Am I embarrassed about it? What is it? And so those are the things that stand out to me, and definitely right now in our organization, there's some drama happening, and I'm trying to like navigate it. I want to fix it before I talk about it. I want to talk about the testimony on the other side of it, as opposed to talking about the wounds that I'm feeling right now, the hurt and the feeling of betrayal and the feeling of like those are hard to talk about, right? I feel emotional even just saying the words, right? Like how do you navigate when you feel like you've been betrayed? How do you navigate when you feel like you've been, and to not take it personal, and to be like, just get over it, and all the other words that I'm really good at telling myself to conform to the norms of this society, especially in the body that I was born in. And
Hmm. Yeah.
yeah, so I'll stop there. But that's what's really real right now for me.
I have a lot of respect for people who run nonprofits because it's not easy to hold that container always, And I actually used to run a youth activism program,
Mhm.
and it kind of grew to the point, both with young people but also staff, that just got so overwhelming to me, and just like the staff dynamics and stuff, and just figuring out a way to keep everybody together and to hold all of that. I don't know. It's just like in some ways, like, because I work more independently now. Most recently, I worked for like a really small nonprofit with like a couple full-time staff, and there is a part of me that's like afraid of being in a larger work setting again and having to like manage interpersonal dynamics because of how hard that was for me a while back. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway,
Mm, the human parts.
the human parts, yeah, which is funny because in some ways, like, both of our work is all about human parts, but it's still the hardest part.
I'm with you. I feel you.
Yeah.
I feel you. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll do the back of mine.
All right.
All right. So the back doesn't have a beard, but that doesn't mean anything. It's just I didn't get there. um, things on the back here are. I'm like laughing, about to read some intense things, so
I'm with you. I'm
I'll
with
try
you.
to. Yeah. So okay. So number one, fearful of being outcast. Number two, overwhelmed by and fearful of death and suffering. And the third one is interesting. which I think the third one could go on the front and the back, but I'll explain it in a sec why I put it here. But it's actually belief in universal belonging.
Mm.
So I'll go through number one, overwhelmed by and fearful of death and suffering. I think, the last few years, for a number of reasons, number one, just like COVID and everything, and like having, an elder family member of mine pass from that, and just like the broader, just the impact of that on society and the fear around that, fear of your 76-year-old father getting it pre-vaccine and all that stuff. He didn't, but just like fear of that. And the mental health elements that are getting worse, it seems, all the time. Like, I've had multiple friends attempt suicide in the last few years. Had a childhood friend OD and die a couple months ago. And just in general, I think also, like, I'm not that old. I'm in my early 30s, but just like, even for me, like, elders in my life getting sick, that generation getting older, fear of losing people I have like attachment bonds to. I think just a lot of that. And I don't acknowledge it all the time. And I think with COVID too, not just COVID, but like all of this that I'm mentioning, I developed the ability, even more than earlier times in my life, to like disassociate, like to just be like, no, gonna take that out of my brain, and like, and I just feel like that is a part, like there's like a tension in my body from that is present, and that I just haven't figured out how to fully process. Yeah. Fearful of being outcast. I think this relates to I think I've worked with this a lot, and I'm a lot better with it now. But it relates to childhood. Like, we talked about being bullied in middle school, and for me, broader than just middle school. But I was always like, I was young for my grade, and I was also like a real late bloomer. So I was like literally the smallest kid of all genders in my grade for many years. And everybody hit puberty before me. And I was just like, middle school, I was like hyper vigilant physically about getting physically harmed. But even almost more painful than that was like, it felt like I was invisible. Like, it felt like nobody could like see me. Like, and I was just like, I was just there, but like no one cared that I was there. Had a lot of coping mechanisms, including like trying to get really good at sports and all sorts of things to overcome that over the years, in school, but dealt with that a lot. So I think some of that fear of being outcast maybe even relates to some of that pain from back then. And some of it also relates to my work, honestly. Like having to just like, and even talking to people about my work, like just different people, like, be they like nomad, like on, and that's across lines of race, and that's also across lines of politics. Like, cause like if I go to, there's people who are white, who, extended family of mine, or just folks that just a lot of people, that like, especially until recently, I was working full time at this organization that was literally called White Awake. So being like, what do you do? Like, this is like, what do you do? And I work at this organization called White Awake. And they're like, it's like immediately just like this thing that is like, whoa, what is that? Like, what? Yeah. But also just describing, the work I do, and especially, on the right political spectrum, the right wing, like the critical race theory stuff that has like been scapegoated and made into this big thing the last few years, has made me more scared to go into what I do with people in that political world, right? Whereas in some ways before that, I felt like I used to be able to I felt like I could get in there and find a way to make it understood. And then with other people too, like, in some ways, a lot of my work, some of my background also is in like restorative justice. I'm actually in Oakland too, and came out here like 8 or 9 years ago to work at this organization, Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth.
Okay.
And so
That RJoy?
that RJoy, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, RJoy. Yeah. So I feel like a lot of the energy and lens that I bring to my work is a restorative lens. And that's with men previously, like when I did more facilitating of groups of men, like I was telling you about. And it's also with white people. And to me, and this actually goes into the next one, actually, belief in universal belonging, which I put on the back, even though I forefront that in my work, but I put it on the back because, like, to me, the key to creating change is to like show people who've been diverted from their path, right? Who've been pushed into a harmful path. It's showing people that they belong to something better, right? And it's showing white folks, showing men who might be causing harm, that there is a legacy of struggle of people who look like you that you can come into and join, and we can belong to something different, and there are people on the left who kind of are in like a punitive activist politics, right? That is, sometimes really effective and powerful and important, but is sometimes based in kind of a politics of shame. And that, to me, even though we always have to validate like the pain and the harm that has been done in this society, right? And that's universal. That always has to be done. But to me, sometimes when I'm afraid of sharing with everybody who might be progressive or on the left, or like kind of the core of my philosophy, I think, because people cannot have space for their being belonging for white folks, for example, or for another dominant group, right?
Yeah. I'm just taking a breath right there. Thank you. That's I appreciate you sharing that. I think thank you for the phraseology of the back. I think I resonate with a lot of that. I resonate with a lot of the fear of pain, of death. I think the fear of worry, more so just like this, sometimes like making up a story, like what could happen, right? What could happen if, right? And maybe like the worry that goes deeper than that, right? It's like, okay, it's just a wild, silly thought, but right? And then how do you not like get into the rumination of the worry so it doesn't make you paralyzed from doing anything, from going outside, from going on a road trip, right? All the things the stories you can make up about what could happen, like um fears, right? Like just all those things that pop up. And I think the belonging piece, I think, is really even also really touching in the sense that we, in this work around masks, we're trying to help people see that there's so much more to you than anybody can see by looking at you. Like there's more to you. There's more to
Right,
me,
right, 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 right.
you know? And the idea of belonging, I heard a quote says like belonging is so much different than fitting in, right? Fitting in is like I need to change myself in order to be able to be accepted by this space, this group, this community. But belonging says how I am and who I am, period, is enough and is okay and is good and is perfect as I am, as I'm in journey of who I dream of being. But how about I just give myself a space, and how about we find those spaces, right? And I think oftentimes if we're not careful, and a lot of work that I do in schools when I'm talking to young people about that, I'm like, who are you? Do you know who you are? Do you things you talk about with your friends, is that the things that are really important to you, valuable to you, or do you only talk about the things that they need to talk about so that you can feel like you fit in, right? And how do you begin looking for those places where you can just belong because you're yourself and you're not having to craft the right perfect sentence to say in the moment. You just say what's real for you, and people hear you and they accept you, right? As opposed to being like, oh, that's actually too. I can't say that. That's too childish here. I got to be I got to be, and all the things that we do that, not only as kids do it, but adults do it too, right? And
Hmm.
yeah. So thank you for sharing those. This is the work, right? This is the work. This is the work, and you starting this work in college, working with men in men's circles. I think, I didn't join a men's circle till like, let's see, I've been on my men's team right now since 2010. So what, 13 years. But this idea that I was out of college for many years. I had already been building this mentoring program for many years. I didn't even know that there was a thing that existed
Yeah.
where men could be open and honest and tell each other the truth and not have to image protect, but to not have to try and fit in, but to feel like, here's who I am and I get to be me. And I think that's so powerful. I think so many men need it. Not just men, but I think in the context of just talking about the men piece, I think men need it. And I think our boys and young men for sure need it. And so that's why these masks matter. And so, thank you for being willing to share yours with us here, right? We tell people when we talk about the show is
Yeah, it was cool it was great to do. I was just saying it was great it was, like I said, I hadn't done this type of exercise in a while, and it's like getting back in touch with yourself, you know?
nice. Well, I'm glad. I, I, what in the and maybe this is just only one question I think about as you talk about the work you do, but also in connection to these masks. Do you as you talk to people and you are able to have these deeper conversations with them, have you come to any kind of like not necessarily conclusion, but some kind of ideas as to you talk about working with white folks around these topics, like the ones when you say who may push back or who may say, what's wrong with you for talking about these topics? Do you have an understanding, or have you got a clear understanding of why? I mean, what I hear people who are debating about the CRT and they're not actually telling truth, right? They're not actually speaking truth, but they either have regurgitating some non-truth that they heard, or they've made themselves believe that they're telling the truth, so therefore it feels real too. But maybe have you as you talk to people, right? Do you have an understanding of why they've been so willing to believe things that by definition can be proved to not be true? Like
Right. Right. Right, like, what's at the root of that, you mean?
yeah, just like yeah,
Yeah.
or maybe not even at the root of it, but
Yeah.
what are some of the reasons they give you, or why they push back against even be willing to hear it? Like if they've already bought into some other narrative.
Primarily the people I work with, right, are people who, like, well, I'll get into, like, my thoughts about what you specifically just asked, but I'll also say that, like, I think primarily the people that I work with are people who choose to be a part of trainings and courses, right? So a lot, like, the people I'm working with the most are on the progressive end, and a lot of, some of what I'm primarily doing with them is, number one, like I was saying, like, right, getting people out of that place of being stuck in shame, you know, and getting people to a place of emotional groundedness so that you can actually learn and grow and be fully there with an open heart, and actually not just like say all these buzzwords while like disassociating from your body. you know
Yeah,
um, yeah, and then also is supporting them with giving people, because a lot of these folks, like, you know they might be members of Surge in working in Louisiana, trying to organize poor and working class people who might be more on the conservative side to support ending cash bail, right? And join sort of like a multiracial coalition of people to do that,
yeah, yeah,
in that state or in a certain city. And I mean, okay. And I think for me, what has given me a little bit more understanding, I think, of myself, not, and never to make an excuse, right, for it. Like, not to make an excuse for anybody, but I think, like, when like the only way to actually change something is if you understand its driving forces, you know? Um, you
Yeah.
know, and because everything in the world makes sense. Like there's a reason for everything. It's not like there's just these inherently harmful people, be they of any identity, right? It's like, and if we think that,
That's right.
we're never going to actually change anything because we're just like in this, like you can't do anything with that.
Yeah. I think it's kind of like what you said earlier when you said something like, I'm not sure who you quoted, but you said somebody said that we should show people the trick. Like, so the idea is that if
Yeah,
regardless of trying to like feed into like telling you the facts, like here is what the story is trying to do to you. Here's what here's what this narrative is trying to do. It is trying to create division, and the more they can divide good,
right.
kind, loving people from each other, we won't talk to each other and understand each other more. We won't be able to see that the color of my skin is just pigment and cold and some deep roots of where I've come from, but it does not make me so much different than you. But if I use my eyes to judge who you are, I could say, oh, there's nothing you have in common with me because you don't look like me. And I think that is where we find ourselves really falling into these traps.
Yeah, yeah. And for me, like what has been mind blowing for me. So like when I was younger, right, when I was at Arjoy, like we said, and before that, I was learning about like histories of racial violence, like silenced histories of racial atrocities that have happened throughout US history, right? And those are so important to like unveil and show to people and not and repair. But the things after learning a lot of that, the thing that really started taking me to another level of like understanding was not just learning the history of racial violence, but learning the history of racial socialization, right? Literally learning about how since the 1600s in this country there have been business backed legislative and propaganda campaigns to make ordinary, poor working and middle class white people to fear and resent people of color and to see as their ally, you know, corporate white elites who actually don't have their interest at heart. And it's like just been replicated in all these different ways since, and I think the way to show someone the trick today is to when that we talk to people in our courses about when they're the ones going door to door canvassing in these communities, right, is to talk to people and say there is this class of corporate politicians who is trying to take away your health care and take away your social security and suppress your unions and suppress your wages, and all the while they're telling you that the cause of your problems is black protesters, is undocumented immigrants, is Muslims. And we need to see who our real enemy is here. And we need to come together to create the society that all of us need.
Yeah.
That's showing someone the trick. And it can't be done. It can't be done until we understand how that socialization happens.
Yeah.
And we actually, because so much of like liberal media, right? It's almost like the right wing corporate right wing media is telling everybody that the cause of their problems is, like working class people of color, right? Who are doing all the things that I just said, right? And then you have people like, like Jordan Klepper on the Daily Show, who used to be on the Daily Show, who goes to these Trump rallies and like interviews the most absurd people there and just like asks them all these gotcha questions, and it's like hilarious. But ultimately what that type of thing is doing is making, like liberal America think the root cause of suffering in this country is like rural working class white people in and of themselves. You know what I mean? And in some ways, it's like we need to see the broader system of manipulation that is at play and how this system of racial capitalism actually works in this broader way.
Yeah.
if we want to actually develop a strategy that is capable of changing it.
And we need to. And we got to. Yeah. You know, David, I want to appreciate you for being here and for these words, because I think that we need to have more of these conversations. I mean, I think us recognizing that but if we weren't looking at the outside, we have probably more in common than we do not in common. And I think that the challenge is oftentimes if we were walking together or we were sitting at a cafe, people were like, how do they have anything in common? Because they would look at the outside and make a judgment about everything else. And sadly, our eyes do a lot of the judging first, and then it picks up the story of our intuition and our judgments and our beliefs and all those things. So, we hope to keep having these conversations. We want to keep having these conversations with men around the world, because I think that if we can begin to let our eyes have left power into the decisions we make, and we begin to listen to the heart, use our ears and our hearts more, I think we could do a lot of work around this. And so thank you for the work you're doing. If people who are interested in learning about the courses that you're talking about, the I think you say workshops, but if you tell folks how they can get in touch with the work that you're doing, I want to respect your time and appreciate you for being on the show. And thanks for sharing your mask with us.
Yeah, of course. So my website is just davidbfdean.com. Also on like Instagram at davidbfdean. On my website, you can sign up for a newsletter that I send out regularly, which has monthly articles that are about a lot of the topics we talked about today, as well as announcements about courses and trainings as they come available. So that's the way to stay connected. Yeah.
We're going to link all that in the show notes, and we hope to continue hearing from you. Thank you for being a part of the Million Mask movement.
Yeah.
Folks, listen, David and I shared our mask here publicly, but you don't have to do it publicly. You can go to the website, millionmasks.org, make your mask anonymously. And maybe when you find a little bit more courage, maybe you find somebody in your life who you will share it with, but you don't have to. Maybe the first start is recognizing that there's so much more to you than anybody can see by looking at you, as David and I showed you here. There's so much more to David than I would have known just by seeing him. And there's more to me than maybe you would know by looking at me as well. So, David, is there any last words you want to say to the folks out there before we sign out of here?
Yeah, well, I mean, I just want to appreciate you, actually. And I was telling you this a little before we started recording, but so I went to college from 2009 to 2013, and that was when I was kind of doing that work with men in that setting, and that evolved out of me playing. One of the things that I did to actually like overcome some of that fear of being outcast as a middle schooler, right, and early high schooler, was get really good at basketball. And I played basketball during the first 2 years of college, and was actually like recruited over and cut as a sophomore from my college team. And that made it. And so like I was in this like hyper masculine, emotionally suppressed world, and started to try to get out of that by doing some of this men's work. But it was like really scary for me all the time. And it was almost like when in like a couple years after I finished school, when I saw your documentary, it was like this final validation that like this is a thing in the world. Like we can be different, like we can be human beings. So I just wanted to appreciate you for that and what that meant to me. It was like taking this stuff mainstream. Let's go.
Let's go. Well, I'm glad. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for the work that you've been willing to do, right? I imagine there's plenty of young men in your college who were like, I ain't going to that thing.
Yeah.
What's happening over there, right? And so thank you for being willing to do the work, because I think it takes work. It's not often intuitive for everyone, but it is work that we do. So thank you. And I'm glad you saw the documentary. I'm glad you were able to see that. I hope more people have seen it. If you haven't seen the Mask You Live In documentary, we invite you to go and find it somewhere. It's out there somewhere, Many libraries have it, but watch it and you'll see that it's just as relevant today as it was in 2015, sometimes even more so, you would say. Definitely what we've seen over the last several years. So thanks again, David, for being here. And we look forward to talking to you again.
All right. Thanks, Ashanti.
Taking Off the Mask podcast is produced by Ryan Louie and graphics by Kelly Wong. Guests are managed by Dan Paloma, and the podcast is edited by Samuel Matingo. We'd like to thank everyone who's been a part of the creation of this podcast. And for every guest that has been a part of the show, you are now a part of the Taking Off the Mask family. The Taking Off the Mask podcast is brought to you by the Ever Forward Club. And if you like what you've heard today, please subscribe, write a 5-star review, and share this with someone. We look forward to having more conversations that matter. And please remember, there is more to you than anybody can see by just looking at you.